Hey guys, Aaron Cybertron Zeng here, and today I'm back with another episode of Road to Ranked, where I climb the online VGC 15 ladder and provide live commentary as I go. We're going to jump straight into today's episode, currently sitting with a rating of 1733. The last two episodes were both really good, so if you have not seen those, I highly recommend you guys check it out. But as you guys may know, we were able to pick up 4 wins in a row in the last two episodes, which was pretty nice, as we're going to find a Japanese opponent with a rating of 1659. So I'd really like to extend that win streak. As always, if you guys enjoy Road to Rank, please share support by leaving a like on the video. I'd really appreciate it. Anyway, my opponent here has a pretty standard looking team of Amoonguss, Talonflame, Hydreigon, Bisharp, Kangaskhan, and Thundurus. So nothing too out of the ordinary here, but one thing that's always tricky is what item the Hydreigon has and whether it actually carries a fire type attack or not, because if it doesn't, then, you know, Ferrothorn can thrive a bit more. So Ferrothorn here is decent, but at the same time, it takes a lot of damage from, you know, obviously Talonflame's Flare Blitz, but even Bisharp's knockoff, Kangaskhan's low kick, and Hydreigon's even Dark Pulse, but, you know, fire type attack would obviously one-hit KO it, so that's pretty scary here. Blaziken's really good because of his ability to one-hit KO 4 of my opponent's 6 Pokemon, but it really wants to avoid the Talonflame and the Thundurus, and unfortunately, because my opponent does have the Bisharp, I can't just carelessly lead the Landorus here, because, of course, Bisharp can take a Defiant Boost, and that would not be good for me, so I'm gonna have to really think about what to lead with here. Thundurus honestly isn't too bad, and part of me wants to go with it. Kangaskhan is also a pretty solid lead here, so let's consider. The reason why I really wouldn't want to lead with Kangaskhan is because my opponent does have a Thundurus, and if my opponent, you know, paralyzes me, that would set me back a decent amount, since I think Kangaskhan's speed is probably the most important thing here. But I think I actually like just going with Blaziken here, and let's see, the two threats to Blaziken are Talonflame and Thundurus. So I could actually just go Blaziken Thundurus or Blaziken Kangaskhan. Either of those work, honestly. You know, I think I like Kangaskhan Blaziken the most, yeah. I definitely still want Landorus in the back because Intimidate's really helpful against Talonflame and Kangaskhan, and Rock Slide, obviously. For the last one, kind of tricky call here. Ferrothorn's decent, but I don't know, I think my opponent has way too many ways to beat it, so I'm not going to bring it in this match. The Thundurus is actually probably the Pokemon I'm leaning towards the most right now, though Jellicent is also kind of tempting. It's just my opponent has 2 Dark-type Pokemon, a Thundurus, and an Amoonguss, so 4 ways to hit it for super effective, not too great, so I'm going to end up bringing the Thundurus here as we're going to get into this match. So, you know, pretty even matchup, I'd say, in terms of Pokemon. It's going to come down to what my opponent really decides to lead with here, and that's why leads are always so important. But, you know, I think in best of 1, you always just want to make the safest lead possible. At best of 3, you can play a bit more aggressively, but typically in best of 1, you want something that can cover all your options. So, I'm going to lead with my Kangaskhan and Blaziken, as we do see the Amoonguss and Bisharp come out from my opponent. That's actually a pretty ideal start for me here, because of the fact that Blaziken puts on immense pressure against both of my opponent's Pokemon, so I don't even have to go for the Protect here. I could go straight for the Overheat onto Amoonguss. I mean, Amoonguss could Rage Powder here, but it's not like Amoonguss is really doing anything. So I think if, based off the position my opponent's in, he's going to want to switch out into that Talonflame. So I think right now I want to predict the Talonflame switch out. And I feel like Bisharp would be the one to switch out into Talonflame. So I'm going to go for the Overheat onto Amoonguss and the Double Edge straight onto Bisharp here. So we'll see if my opponent decides to stay in, whether he decides to Rage Powder and attack or whatnot. But I definitely have really, really good lead for me here. I think my opponent was probably anticipating the Landorus team. That's exactly why I didn't want to bring it. Unfortunately, no switch out for me here, so we'll see if my opponent decides to Rage Powder or Protect or whatnot. You know, double edging into a Rage Powder would be pretty bad for Kangaskhan here because of the Rocky Helmet damage. But we are going to see Bisharp take the Protect here, so let's see if Amoonguss protects as well. No, he doesn't, so Double Edge goes into, but Overheat here should pick up the knockout. Fortunately connects with the Amoonguss, which is fantastic. So with that Life Orb boost, Blaziken stab, Overheat picks up the knockout onto Amoonguss, eliminates it in 1 hit, and we're looking at a really, really good start to the game just because, you know, I didn't lose anything for that other than Blaziken, you know, taking some damage and -2 special attack. But that's actually perfect for me because now Blaziken's also faster than the Kangaskhan. Anything my opponent switches in is going to, you know, take a lot of damage, and I can freely low kick that Bisharp slot next turn for a free knockout unless he chooses to switch out. But we're going to see Kangaskhan come out from my opponent here, which I'm also really happy to see. So this is a fantastic start for me. And right now I think I should prioritize just knocking out the Bisharp. Of course, his Kangaskhan can only fake out 1 of 2 Pokemon here, so I'm going to go just straight for the Superpower onto his Kangaskhan and go for the low kick onto his Bisharp here. I'm basically saying, alright, you have to attack my Blaziken because if you don't, you know, I can just knock you out. And the Bishop here also can't do very much, which is why I thought the lead was so good. Not only did I have the type advantage, neither of his Pokemon really did very much offensively. The Bishop, of course, can choose the Sucker Punch or Knock Off, but against a Blaziken, Sucker Punch, Knock Off, and Iron Head all aren't very effective. Of course, Blaziken's pretty frail here. He's not going to go for the Protect, trying to attack here directly with that Kangaskhan. Blaziken gets his superpower off, and man, Blaziken is just picking up KOs left and right today. Gets the KO here onto Kangaskhan. I think the low kick here will be able to finish Bishop as well, so we might have a really fast first game for today's episode. So Kangaskhan does manage to get the low kick off, and that should eliminate the Bishop in one hit. It does have Focus Sash, which I do think is the better item on Bishop right now, since there's so many super effective attacks running around, and that's going to pick up a KO. So I think this episode should just be a lesson on leading correctly. My opponent here, I don't think brought the right answers to deal with both Blaziken and Kangaskhan. I think Talonflame, Thundurus, and Kangaskhan, a combination of those could have threatened me. And he did have the Talonflame as well, so I'm kind of surprised for him not to have brought in the Talonflame over the Kangaskhan, but not much he can really do at this point. So I'm just gonna... Yep, yeah, there's no way he can... I mean, we literally took... The only damage we took in this game was from Kangaskhan, or from Blaziken's Life Orb recoil. So that was the fastest game we featured on Road to Rank in about a very long time. But I think that game demonstrates how good Blaziken is when used correctly and when, you know, played with correctly. So it really was able to just put on offensive pressure right from the start. I'm sure my opponent there was kind of hoping I would over-predict that first turn, or maybe Protect with my Blaziken, probably going for a Spore onto Kangaskhan, but there was no reason to Protect there based off how good my lead matchup was. So, you know, I had a lead there, and basically I never wanted to give it up, and it worked out perfectly. So really happy about that, and it's really nice to feature Blaziken and show off just how good it is when it is used properly. And that's exactly why it's an anti-metagame Pokemon. Ability to knock out some of the most common Pokemon, like Landorus T, like Kangaskhan, like Bisharp, like Amoonguss. You know, you can just imagine how good it is, especially with the power to one-hit KO all of them. And Mix this is just so powerful, because even Superpower does like 60 to 70% to Pokemon like Rotom Wash, which, you know, you would want to use to counter the Blaziken. So, man, that game just... I couldn't have asked for a better game to feature how good Blaziken is there. The last 2 days we were able to get some really great KOs with it as well. So, I think it's pretty funny for the storyline of this week, because on the first day we used the team, Blaziken literally just fainted both games and didn't do anything. And now we're able to utilize it a bit better and show just how good it is. So, you know, if you guys are considering trying out Blaziken, I highly recommend it. It's definitely a Pokemon that requires some practice, because it is pretty difficult to use, I'd say. You know, getting it in at the right times, knowing when to bring it in, whether you want to lead with it or whether you want to conserve it in the bag. And, you know, I've only had a couple of games with this team, so I'm still learning, but I can tell that it's a really fun Pokemon to play with. And if you guys are having trouble beating those Pokemon like Kangaskhan and Landorus T, I would highly recommend it. And Speed Boost is just such a good ability, because, you know, most Pokemon that run a Choice Scarf use it to get that extra speed, but then Blaziken kind of has like a Choice Scarf hidden in it with the Life Orb, which gives you the extra damage output you need to one-hit KO basically everything. I know one question some people asked about Blaziken is, why do you run Life Orb instead of Focus Sash? And that's because you really need the Life Orb to get that extra damage output and knock out the Landorus T. I actually couldn't find an opponent there, so let's jump back onto the ladder and see if we can find somebody. But yeah, I mean, that game was just not good for my opponent there. I'm like, that's what I was talking about when I was referring to like leading correctly and whatnot. And in a best of one, it's really risky to lead with two Pokemon that you think will, you know, beat what you think your opponent will lead with, but then your opponent ends up bringing the one Pokemon that just beats both of those Pokemon. And I guess that sounds pretty vague, but to give you an example, you know, let's say you have an Aegislash and a Ferrothorn on your team, and both of those Pokemon are really good against all of your opponent's team except for, let's say, a Heatran or a Charizard, and the rest of your team counters that Heatran or the Charizard. So you might be inclined to lead with Aegislash and Ferrothorn just because of the fact that everything else counters that one fire type so much, and you think to yourself, oh, my opponent's definitely not going to bring that Pokemon. But then if they lead with it, you know, if they decide, you know what, I'm going to take the risk, because if my opponent decides to lead with the two Pokemon that I hope they lead with, then I can automatically have a huge advantage. And yeah, that's kind of what happened there. So in best of 3, you can take more risks, I think, with what you choose to lead with. But in best of 1, at least when I play, I really like to be more conservative, because you want to give yourself, you know, all the options right from the start, and it's a really scary position to be in if you lead poorly in a best of 1, because the pressure is right from the start. You know, if your opponent can just make average plays, well, you have to make better plays to, you know, switch your Pokemon out and get the right Pokemon in. And switching is obviously fantastic in VGC, but against a smart opponent, they'll be able to capitalize off that, and a smart player will put themselves into the position where they can double up on that slot, for example, with a not very effective attack and a super effective attack to ensure that anything coming in will take a ton of damage. So, just a lesson to learn there from switching and leading correctly in best of one. But I think my opponent definitely had a difficult matchup there. But we're finally going to find a second opponent for today, a 1780 rated player from Japan, rocking a pretty cool team as well. We do see another Talonflame, but Landorus, Salamence, Abomasnow, Liepard, and the Excadrill. So, obvious Mega Evolution here in Salamence, but a bunch of Pokemon stick out to me: Liepard, Excadrill, and Abomasnow. Excadrill here is most definitely Mold Breaker. I mean, unless it's Sand Rush, but Mold Breaker only makes sense. Abomasnow here is also really interesting because it's with the Landorus, and so, you gotta wonder what items both Pokemon has. Typically, I would guess Landorus has Choice Scarf and Abomasnow has Focus Sash, but Abomasnow is a Pokemon that likes to take advantage of the Choice Scarf as well. A Liepard here, a really big threat just because of its ability to Encore, so Blaziken's a Pokemon that typically likes to protect right from the start, but obviously not going to be too great against a Liepard. And so while Blaziken's fantastic against, Liepard, Abomasnow, Excadrill, and Landers, it really suffers against Talonflame and Salamence. So, I'm going to really have to lead well here, but let's see. I think Jellicent is actually very, very good in this game, especially because of its ability to shut down both the Talonflame and the Salamence, and Thundurus as well. Ferrothorn's not bad here either, so a lot of Pokemon worth considering. This is one of the games where all 6 of my Pokemon kind of makes sense to me here. But let's see what I want to lead with the most. For me, Landorus Blaziken makes the most sense just because I get that Intimidate off right from the start, but then again, I guess that's kind of weak. I feel like my opponent's going to prioritize leading with Salamence or Talonflame, so if I could predict that correctly, I think Thundurus here would be really good. So maybe Thundurus and Landorus? Though that's really weak to Abomasnow. Thundurus Blaziken, or Thundurus Kangaskhan, because Kangaskhan can attack through the Focus Sash. So that's kind of tempting. Or Thundurus Jellicent, but you can see how weak I am to Abomasnow. I only have 14 seconds to choose my team. You know what, I'm going to go Thundurus, Landorus with Blaziken in the back. Do I even want Kangaskhan here? Yeah, I think it's still worth bringing. So I'll bring Kangaskhan as my last one. But, it feels a bit weird leaving Jellicent or Ferrothorn in the back just because both of those Pokemon are also very viable in this set. So, once again, this is all about best of one play, and the reason why I talked so much about best of 1 versus best of 3 earlier is because best of 3 is, we're seeing a huge shift into best of 3, with US Nationals this year being all best of 3 through the Swiss rounds, and then Worlds obviously being best of 3 as well. So I think it's an interesting discussion to have. But anyway, let's get into this battle. I'm going to lead with Thundurus and Landorus here against my opponent's Salamence and Liepard, so I do get the Intimidate I wanted against his Salamence, and Salamence doesn't like facing against Thundurus at all, so, that's what I was hoping for, and that works out pretty nicely here. Now, I have a bunch of options. I could taunt his Liepard, or I could Thunder Wave it. And I could also choose to, just attack the Salamence slot, but there's a decent chance he switches out or protects here. Let's see who you could switch out into. I guess Excadrill wouldn't be too bad. So a play I could make is predict him to switch out and, Earthquake instead of Rock Sliding. I don't know. If I were my opponent, I'd switch the Salamence out right now. But I guess you could also switch out into his Landorus, which would kind of be bad. So I guess I'll go for the damage onto the Liepard, and yeah, I'll just Thunderbolt Earthquake this first turn. I don't know, I'm expecting the Salamence to switch out here, but nope, he's just gonna Mega Evolve, so didn't make the right prediction there, but that's alright. He shouldn't be able to capitalize off too much, which is fine. Liepard here probably gonna go for a Fake Out onto one of 2 Pokemon, though might also opt for a foul play. Nope, we are going to see the Fake Out come out. Going to target down that Thundurus. I'm okay with that. Let's see what his Salamence goes for. Unfortunately, he does now know that I'm Choice Scarfed and locked into Earthquake. Of course, he should have known I was Scarf based off our abilities in that first turn, but I still do over 50% to Liepard, which is quite nice. It actually has the Eject button, not an item I was expecting there, but this will probably mean a free switch into Abomasnow, which is really bad for me. I was not anticipating Eject button, although I should have considered that. However, he doesn't bring in Abomasnow, indicating to me he probably didn't bring it. We do see the Landorus come in for my opponent here, which I am alright with. We'll see what Salamence goes for here. Wow! Goes for the Substitute! That was interesting, but a really nice move to use there. Huh. So that blocks any potential Thunder Waves. Very cool, very cool. So I wonder if my opponent's going to predict me to switch out right now and go for... I mean, the Landorus switching out here is basically the most obvious play you can predict from me. So part of me wants to stay in just because I don't want him to capitalize off the fact that, he can get a free... He can go for, a Rock Slide Hyper Voice. Then again, I think it'll be important to knock out his sub and then bring in my Landers back for free. So I'm just going to Thunderbolt his Salamence here to knock out the Substitute and bring out Kangaskhan. Really, really cool move to see there, though I was not anticipating Substitute, and that's not a very common move on Mega Salamence, which typically likes to be built, you know, mixed like Draco Meteor, Hyper Voice, Double Edge, Earthquake, whatnot. We're going to see a Hyper Voice come out here. He outspeeds the Landers, so presumably his Landers is not going to be Choice Scarf here, which is also kind of interesting. It's slower than my Thundurus, which is good information, so probably Assault Vest, though there's also a chance that it's Choice Banded, and if that's the case, Thundurus will not appreciate this Rock Slide. We're going to see the Rock Slide come out here. Kangaskhan obviously took a ton of damage because it couldn't Mega Evolve, and I do think that's a Choice Band Landorus there. Able to knock out my Thundurus, however, misses the knockout onto the Kangaskhan. He's actually Life Orb there. That also makes sense. So very, very cool to see that. So with that, I'm definitely going to switch in my Landorus here to get the Intimidate off, and now I have Rock Slide and Fake Out Pressure, but not the best of turns for me there, and there was very little I could have done because switching into my Blaziken wouldn't have really helped me out. So this is kind of a big turn here, and I'm actually really scared because if that Landorus is mixed, he might have HP Ice as well, and then that's, you know, a knockout on Landorus. So I'm going to go for the Rock Slide here, Mega Evolve, and I guess I'll Fake out the Salamence. Yeah, that makes more sense to me right now. Though he might also switch out, so looking at who he has in the back, I'm wondering who he might switch out into. Potentially Excadrill, maybe? So maybe I should Fake out the Landorus instead. Yeah, I'm going to Fake out Landorus instead here. Okay, he withdraws Landorus, good play. And out comes the Liepard once again. So I'll be able to knock out Liepard here with Fake Out. I wonder if his Salamence is Protect. We've seen Substitute and we've seen Hyper Voice. So presumably, I mean, I really don't know what to expect from this Salamence right now. Okay, he protects with the Salamence, which works out nicely for me there. So he does have Protect and Substitute and Hyper Voice, so you really gotta wonder what his last attack is. Potentially Double Edge, Draco Meteor, Fire Blast, Flamethrower, Earthquake. You know, Salamence is a Pokemon that can run so many different moves, but that Substitute was really, really clever because forced me to target down that slot and also prevented him from getting Thunder Wave. So a very, very cool, you know, set there, and a really smart play by my opponent there to get the Intimidate off there and get a free switch him back into his Landorus. And once again, it's a really awkward position to be in right now, especially because I can't just freely switch into my Blaziken, which is kind of a big deal right now. So a flinch here might be really essential, but I'm going to go for the Rock Slide, and let's see. I can't afford switching into Blaziken, which kind of stinks. This team doesn't have that many great flying resists, and unfortunately the Life Orb Rock Slide was too much for my Thundurus to deal with, and without Hidden Power Ice, I wasn't able to hit his Landorus either, which is, you know, kind of a big deal there. So I'm going to go for the Sucker Punch here onto Salamence, so he might Substitute, which would be interesting. I would probably sub if I were him, actually. So maybe I can predict the sub and Double Edge. I don't know. This is actually kind of big here. Just because I'm intimidated, so Rock Slide's most likely going to be a 3 at KO on his Salamence. Then again, I can't really risk him going for a Rock Slide Hyper Voice. That would just knock both of me out. I might need a flinch here. I'll go for the Sucker Punch here. Okay, he does go for an attack, so at least I made the right call there, but with the Intimidate, obviously not going to do very much there at all. So Landorus launches this Rock Slide, misses his Salamence. That is really, really disappointing. Okay, so his Salamence gets a Hyper Voice off, and let's see if his Landorus attacks through this Rock Slide. Critical hit there on Kangaskhan, not going to matter, but I guess I needed one of two flinches there to have a shot at winning this game. He goes for the knockoff there, actually, onto my Landorus. Really interesting play. However, it is going to be able to pick up the knockout, so that Substitute basically saved my opponent right from the start because it prevented me from Thunder Waving, and then the Life Orb there on Salamence as well, really coming in clutch. So, you know, unfortunately, with Landorus and Salamence, not going to be able to really do much. So, after a really, you know, clean sweep that first game, this one my opponent kind of ran all over me, and part of it was just the sub on Salamence. I mean, this team is not well equipped to deal with it. If anything, I think Jellicent would have been a pretty solid call to bring in this match, because other than the Abomasnow, there's nothing that can really beat it, and you can imagine how well it would fare in this position. So, yeah. I mean, there's really no way to win this game at this point, so very well played by my opponent there, and he's just going to launch another Substitute there with Salamence, you know, might as well, as Landorus here is actually going to be slower, so Blaziken gets the Hidden Power Ice off, but not going to be able to win this game. But I am curious as to what my opponent's last Pokemon is. If it's not the Abomasnow, then, you know, I'll feel a bit silly for not bringing the Jellicent. The main reason why I was scared of Jellicent was because my opponent could double target it and then get another attack off, and he has a lot of spread attacks on this team with Earthquake and Rock Slide on Landorus and Excadrill. Blizzard on Abomasnow, Hyper Voice on Salamence, and that was what I was scared of the most. And it looks like he actually did not bring Abomasnow, so Jellicent definitely would have been the right call in this game. Unfortunately, did not make that in team preview. But I think the substitute basically completely changed the game there up for the Salamence, and the eject button did as well, because it was really clever of my opponent to have this team that reshuffles the Intimidates over and over again. So Salamence getting that first Intimidate off against Landorus, and then Liepard switching out, allowing the Salamence to set up a free substitute, and then Landorus getting another Intimidate off was kind of a big deal there. And because I locked myself into Rock Slide or Earthquake with my Landorus instead of Rock Slide, that was also kind of an issue. Whereas if I, locked myself into Rock Slide, I wouldn't have forced to switch out my Landorus there. So I kind of overextended on that prediction on the first turn, and I had to pay for it. But that was a really, really cool team. The Salamence there was substitute, standard looking Pokemon on the surface, but sub Salamence, the Liepard there with the eject button, which was really, really good as well, and then the Landorus with Life Orb, which allowed him to knock out my Thundurus. So that's why I typically like HP Ice a bit more on Thundurus, just because if they're Choice Scarf, it's a 3-hit KO with Rock Slide, and if they're not Choice Scarf, Hidden Power Ice can do a ton of damage, if not KO them. But Chance, who originally built this team, decided on Swagger, and I decided to just use it for the week. But those were some really fun games, despite both of them being pretty one-sided. I think that first game basically featured how important it is to lead correctly and have the right Pokemon. The second game is, should have brought Jellicent most likely. Ferrothorn would have been alright. I mean, Hyper Voice still does a ton of damage there, but I guess even Jellicent wouldn't have been too great since he had the knockoff with his Landorus and the Hyper Voice, but that was just a really cool team, and I think Substitute was a very, very clever move on that Salamence. So I did like that a lot, and it's always nice to see players innovate even standard Pokemon, and that, is really, really a testament to team building. But yeah, that's going to be it for this episode, guys. Hope you guys enjoyed it. Leave a like always if you did, and I'll see you guys tomorrow. Alright, peace.